We're going to start in Luke 14, which place we've already been. And then we're going to compare that to Matthew 22. But let's start in Luke 14. It's about wedding feasts, and I heard a stat today that I had never heard before. A fellow said that when you go through the Gospel of Luke, and I think he said if you average it out within every 5 or 6 verses, there's mention of food or a banquet or feasting or something. I'm going to have to go back and reread Luke and see if that holds true. But there evidently there's so many parables about feasting, so many occasions where Jesus was invited for banquets and dinners and whatever, that sounds like it might be possible. So we're going to compare 2 very similar parables, this one from Luke 14 and then one from Matthew 22. And they're almost the same parable, but there are some differences that I think have to do with timing. Years ago, I worked with Mid McKnight, and Mid was a very popular preacher. Preached in Abilene for a lot of years, and then was kind of on the circuit back when everybody had a spring meeting and a fall meeting, and he was one of those guys that did a lot of gospel meetings. And so after a while, you have a lot of stories that are the same, but this congregation had never heard it, so you rerun the material that works. I think maybe Jesus had stories that he told, parables that he told, and we have a listing of one occasion, but he may have told that story to several different groups to get that point across or to do whatever he needed to do. So these 2 are very similar, but they're different, and I think the timing is the difference. The first one is told during the middle of his ministry. The second one is told in the last week of his ministry. So we'll see some very different things that he says between the 2. All right, so Luke 14, beginning in verse 16. Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet, and he invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, everything is now ready.' They all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I've just bought a field. I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, 'Go quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you have ordered has been done, but there's still room.' Then the master told his servant, 'Go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet.'" Now, y'all remember, we've already been over this. We talked about perhaps that this was talking about the Jewish refusal of Christ. And so go out and invite all of those that need to come, or maybe it had to do with the leadership refusing. They had better things to do, and so they invited the poor and the halt and the lame and the blind, whoever you could get to come to the feast. So that's the first setting of this parable. Look over at Matthew 22, starting in verse 1, and I think you'll notice some differences pretty quickly. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle have been butchered. Everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' They paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find." So the servants went out into the streets, gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, "How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?" The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen." The older translations say, "Many are called, but few are chosen." So let's take a look at some of the difference. I think the reason for the banquet may be the most telling thing. So Jesus is beginning to insert himself into these parables. So the reason for the banquet is not just a man made a banquet. It's a king made a banquet for his son, right? It's a wedding banquet for his son. So if you don't come, you're not just insulting a man. You're not just insulting a fella who put together a feast. Now you're insulting a king, and since the feast was for his son, you're insulting the son. So again, Jesus kind of inserts himself into this parable as one that is being insulted by the crowds or being insulted by the leadership, who will not pay attention, who will not accept the invitation that they had received. We could probably throw John the Baptist in here pretty easily, right? The servant that goes out and says, "Hey, everything's prepared, come be part of this." And they said, "No, we don't want to have anything to do with it." Right? So that could be an aside to John the Baptist. Also, the demeanor of the ones who were invited. The first one, you get excuses. Right? Here's the reason that I can't come. The second one, this again in the last week of his ministry, they don't give much in the way of excuses. Just, "No, I can't make it. I got other things. I've got business. I have things I have to do." And so they don't even act like it's necessary for them to give an excuse. There's no reason. "I just don't want to come. I've got other things to do." And when they don't attend and the servants keep trying to encourage them to come, then they get violent and they kill the messengers. So instead of just, they didn't want to come, they made excuses, and then he sends the messengers out, "Well, go ask somebody else. Go out into the highways and byways. Go get somebody that will come because these other people have made their excuses." In this one, they actually get violent and they kill some of the messengers. Well, if the messengers in this parable are the same as the messengers in other parables, we're probably again talking about prophets and maybe even talking specifically about John the Baptist. So when the first guy, he's not a king, he's just a man that throws a banquet, when he gets slighted, what's his answer? What does he do next? Well, just go invite somebody else. Right? These guys don't want to come. I've already got the banquet ready. Go get somebody else to come. What happens with this guy, the king? They've slighted me. They've slighted my son. They've killed my servant. Then what will I do? He sends his soldiers. They destroy the murderers, and they burn down their city. Then he invites other people. Right? So before he ever gets around to inviting the folks from the highways and byways, he takes care of business with these guys who have slighted him. He kills them and burns down their city. Is that prophetic? It probably is. When they disregard God and they disregard Jesus, they don't accept their invitation to be part of this celebration. When they get violent and kill the servants and eventually kill the son himself, although that's not mentioned in this parable, what's the response? Well, he's going to kill those murderers and burn down their city. So this is somewhere between 30 and 33 AD. Within 40 years, God is going to send the Roman army, and the Roman army is going to burn down their city. I don't know, I wish I did know, which of the leadership might have still been around. If you were old enough to be a leader at the time Jesus was crucified, you're probably already over 40, maybe closing in on 50 if you're one of the main leaders. So 40 years later, maybe some of these guys are already dead and gone. But the ones who followed them followed in their footsteps. And the Jewish people and the Jewish leadership was still being resistant to the gospel. And so God sends the armies of Rome to go kill those murderers and burn down their city. Right? Notice verses 11 through 14. Let me get back over there. Matthew 22, 11. When the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man who was there not wearing wedding clothes. And he asked, "How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?" The man was speechless. The king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot, throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen." So not only does he wipe out the bad guys, he kills the murderers and burns down their cities, then he goes into the banquet and finds a guy who's not dressed appropriately for the wedding. And there's a lot of different kind of legends and stories and explanations for this. The most widely held seems to be that in those days, and even currently in the Middle East, one commentator said, that they gave you the clothes to wear. So when you showed up at the door, you would trade your dirty outside clothes for festive garments that they would supply to all the guests. So when the guests got there, they would redress in the nice clothes and come in. So for a guy to be in there who didn't have on wedding clothes, it wasn't because they weren't available. It was because he chose not to put them on. So he ends up making a slight against the father, a slight against the son, and against the wedding proceedings by not dressing the part. And the only thing I could come up with for us that would be similar would be when you are in a wedding and you're told to dress a particular way because you're in the wedding party. When Becky and I were just out of college, I think, I was in the wedding of a friend and we all wore tux, just gorgeous. I think all of ours were either black or a color. But do you remember the big fluffy ruffles that tuxes had back in the 80s? So we were all wearing our fluffy ruffles, but we all looked alike. The girls who were bridesmaids all had bridesmaids dresses that matched. And on some of the bridesmaids, they looked beautiful. And on some of the bridesmaids, they looked ridiculous. The wrong color, the wrong cut, but you're going to look the same because that's the way the wedding is set up. So that's the picture that some of these commentaries were drawing, that when you went to the wedding, there was a dress code, there was a way of dressing that was appropriate, and this guy just didn't buy into it. I watched John MacArthur, and he said it really doesn't matter whether they're right or not. If that's true, then okay, the garment was made available to him. If not, then you're saying that this is the only guy in the whole banquet who couldn't come up with something to wear that was appropriate. Everybody else seems to have been dressed appropriately. This guy was not. He said, either way, it's an affront to the master of the feast. It's an affront to the king and to the son. And so he kind of went at it from that particular direction. It's not about the clothes, though. Right? Don't miss the point and think that we're talking about needing to wear a particular kind of garment. I've heard people try to stretch this really taut and get it into church, right? So, this is what you wear Monday through Friday, and this is what you wear when you go to church. We had that. I can remember that I had church clothes that you never wore during the week, not to school, not to play. That was just what you put on Sunday to go to church, and everybody dressed that way, and, everybody had on a tie and, tie clasps, and everybody dressed alike. And when somebody didn't dress alike, people would say, well, they're not dressed appropriately. And so they kind of insert that into this parable, but that's probably not at all what Jesus had in mind. What he was saying was that when you come, there are lots of people called to the gospel, but the gospel is the thing that changes you. So when you come in and you're part of this wedding feast, when you're part of the kingdom of heaven, there's a change. And if you don't change, if you're not reclothed, then you don't belong there. So when the guy comes in and finds him not dressed as he should be dressed, then he throws him out. Look at Galatians 3. This might fit well with what we're talking about. Galatians 3, let's start in 26. So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free. No, neither is there male or female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So there's that picture of we come in as ourselves with our own clothing, so to speak, but we're baptized, we're clothed with Christ. So at this banquet, to be part of the kingdom of heaven, you came in and you were clothed. Right? And there are Christians, or people who claim to be Christians, who want to be part of the party, they want to be part of the kingdom, they don't want to change anything. Right? They already feel like they're good enough. And so they insert themselves into the party, they insert themselves into the kingdom, and when the king comes by and looks at them, there's something missing, there's something wrong. So they're not clothed with Christ. They're not part of what the decorations are supposed to be. When they tie him up, they throw him into the outer darkness. And this is one of those weeping and gnashing of teeth passages. Right? I don't know what is meant in the physical, how that picture plays out. Right up until then, you've got a guy who doesn't fit. One of these things is not like the others, and so okay, tie him hand and foot and throw him out. Okay, it's drastic. It's an in-your-face response, but he insulted you. He insulted your family. He insulted your son on his wedding day. So we can see, doing that. But then it describes the place where they threw him. Right? It's not just they threw him outside. He didn't just, like a bouncer throws you out. They threw him out into the darkness. And in the darkness is a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth, assuming that there are others like him in this place. Not just his weeping, not just his gnashing, but it's a place of it. It's a surroundings that's describable as weeping and gnashing of teeth. So people have generally interpreted that to be hell. Right? So not only does the king destroy their city and kill the murderers, not only does he throw the interloper out, he throws him into a place that's described in terms like we would imagine hell would be. So it's a very strong passage. What's the difference between the first parable, where they all make nice excuses but don't come, and he invites more and more people until he finally fills up the feast, and the second one? The second one's serious. Right. The second one has all of that strength, that seriousness to it, because Jesus is about 3 days from dying. Right? It's not in the middle of his ministry anymore. It's not a parable to try to wake people up and get their attention. It's a parable to say, in the next couple of days, you're going to arrest me and you're going to kill me, and my dad's going to come take care of it. Right? You're not going to get away with what you're plotting to do. Everybody in the area knew the political, the religious, the social pressure that was on. Nobody missed the point. They were all coming to ask Jesus questions, to try to trap him, to try to get something that they could arrest him for. Jesus knows it, they know it, and so he's just I don't have to be the messianic secret anymore. I can just say it out loud. I'm the Father's son, and you're going to kill me, and my Father's going to take care of it. Right? Your city, your people, your heritage, it's all going to be gone because you didn't repent and you didn't come and take your place in the kingdom. So the difference is the timing. So similar settings, similar stories, but a lot more in your face because, again, we're in the very last week of Jesus' ministry. Excuse me. And then that final phrase, many are called, but few are chosen. I guess you could say through the gospel that everyone is called. Anyone who hears the gospel is called. But what about few are chosen? Is everybody invited to the feast?
Yes.
All right, the gospel is for everybody. So who are the ones that are not chosen? Well, it could be the ones who are not dressed. All right, this guy follows right behind. This guy is not dressed appropriately. So maybe he's trying his own righteousness to enter the kingdom. Won't work. Maybe he's come to the kingdom, but he doesn't want to make changes to be what he has to be in the kingdom. So he's been called. Right? This guy was invited to the feast, but he wasn't chosen because of his attitude or his inability to let God clothe him to become what God was trying to make him. That's at least one possible explanation. When I was a kid, we worshiped at Military Parkway Church of Christ for years and years. And it was large enough to seat probably 2,500 people. And while we were worshiping there, Daddy was the associate minister, education minister. And while we were worshiping there was probably about 600 or 700 people. And they would turn on the air conditioners down to hang meat in the baptistry level. It was cold in that building. We also had a group of elders who were very interested in dress codes. The young ladies, I saw one girl get sent home because they thought she was dressed inappropriately. And then, women will not wear pants to church. That was the rule. I think it was always unspoken in most congregations, but at military it was spoken. So we knew the rules. Well, my mother was a very slender woman, and she was cold-natured. And so it was during that time that people wore granny dresses. It was the extremes. The young lady got sent home because hers was too short, but most of the older women were wearing them all the way down to their ankles. It was granny dresses and mini skirts. It was in that time frame. And she would wear sweatpants underneath of her granny dress because what the elders didn't know couldn't hurt them, right? So one day we were sitting in the pew, and I don't remember what brought it up. I guess I looked over and saw the bottom of her sweatpants under her dress, and I said, you're not supposed to wear pants. And she said, well, many are cold and a few are frozen. So that's how I've always remembered that passage of Scripture. Many are cold and a few are frozen.